Imagine being forced into a hollow brass bull, its cold metal belly sealing you inside. You can't see the crowd gathering outside, but you can hear their laughter. Then the fire is lit beneath you. The metal begins to glow. Your skin sticks to the burning walls as you scream for mercy, but your voice doesn't escape as words. It echoes through pipes, transformed into the roar of a furious animal. This was no myth. In ancient Greece, this was justice, and for slaves, it was only one of many nightmares. From public beatings that left bodies broken in the streets, to cruel mutilations meant to strip away humanity itself, the punishments were not just meant to control, they were meant to humiliate, to destroy, and to make sure everyone else obeyed. Tonight, we uncover the most horrifying punishments inflicted on slaves in ancient Greece, ranked from the truly barbaric to the almost merciful, if such a word can even be used. The crowd would gather in the square, their chatter blending with the crackle of kindling. In the center stood a gleaming brass sculpture, a massive bull, its head tilted upward as if mid-roar. At first glance, it was almost beautiful, the work of a skilled artisan. But beauty was a lie. The real purpose of the Brazen Bull was pure theater, the kind where the main act didn't leave the stage alive. The condemned, often a slave accused of defiance, was forced to crawl inside through a small locking hatch. The metal was cool at first, almost soothing, but there was nowhere to move, no way to turn. Once sealed inside, the executioner lit a fire beneath the bull's belly. Slowly, the metal began to heat. It started with a stifling warmth and then became unbearable. Every breath scorching the lungs, every heartbeat pressed against an oven wall. And then came the sound. Clever pipes and chambers had been built into the bull's head, transforming the victim's screams into a chilling roar. To the crowd, it was the sound of a beast in agony. To the person inside, it was the last sound they would ever make. For the slave, death was not the only punishment here. It was the spectacle, the knowledge that their pain was entertainment, that their final moments were reduced to a performance for the very people who owned them. And in ancient Greece, that was considered justice. If the Brazen Bull was fire, the wheel was time. No roaring metal, no instant heat, just endless hours or even days of breaking and waiting to die. The condemned slave was dragged into the public square, wrists and ankles bound. At the center stood a massive wooden wheel, like the kind used for grinding grain, but this one had only one purpose. The victim was tied spread-eagle to its spokes, their bodies stretched unnaturally, muscles straining with every breath. Then came the hammer. Executioners didn't aim for the head or chest, they aimed for the limbs. A series of heavy, deliberate blows shattered the arms, then the legs. Bones splintered, joints popped. Each strike was slow enough for the crowd to savor. Once every limb was useless, the real cruelty began. The wheel was hoisted upright, the slave's mangled body hanging high for all to see. In this position, blood drained away from vital organs, and breathing became a battle. Some lasted hours, others, with a cruel twist of fate, lasted days, their agony stretching on while flies gathered and the sun baked them dry. The message was simple. This is what happens when a slave forgets their place. And because the wheel was public, it wasn't just the victim who learned it. Every other slave in the city carried the image home, burned into their mind. The wheel wasn't quick, it wasn't clean, it was patience turned into a weapon. And in ancient Greece, that was more than enough to break a human being without touching their spirit, because their spirit had already been crushed long before the last breath. Some punishments didn't rely on spectacle, but on a kind of cruelty that worked in silence and in stinging, searing pain. This one began after a slave survived a beating, a whipping, or the slicing edge of a blade. The cuts weren't the end, they were the beginning. Once the skin was split and bleeding, the executioner would bring out the salt. Not the fine, clean kind you sprinkle on food, but coarse, jagged crystals pulled straight from the sea, with edges sharp enough to slice fresh wounds deeper. The salt was pressed, rubbed, or packed into the open injuries. At first, it burned like fire. The pain didn't fade, It only sharpened as the crystals dissolved, sending an unbearable sting through every nerve ending. But the Greeks didn't stop there. Sometimes the salted victim was left in the sun, their body sweating, the salt pulling moisture from the flesh and tightening the skin until it cracked. Other times, vinegar was poured over the salted wounds, creating a chemical agony that made even the strongest collapse in screaming fits. This wasn't always meant to kill. That was the true terror. It was designed to hurt, to humiliate, to make a lesson last long after the blood clotted. The slave would carry the scars, the stiffness of damaged muscle, and the memory of the fire in their veins for life. For the masters, it was efficient. No need for public execution, no need to lose labor to death. For the victim, it was a punishment they could never forget, even if they desperately wished they could. For some slaves, punishment meant losing the ability to ever stand tall again. In ancient Greece, one of the cruelest ways to break someone's spirit and their body was to target their feet. Not just a beating, but a deliberate, methodical shattering of the bones that carried them. The victim would be bound so they couldn't struggle, often with legs stretched out and ankles held firm. Then came the hammer, sometimes wood, sometimes iron. Each strike wasn't random. It was aimed to break the metatarsals, the small but essential bones of the foot, in precise succession. The pain was blinding, sharp enough to force unconsciousness. But the torment didn't stop there. In some cases, the punishment ended with the victim being forced to walk on their newly shattered feet. Every step tore soft tissue and displaced bones, causing swelling so severe the skin would split. Infection was almost guaranteed, and without proper care, gangrene could follow. The Greeks knew what they were doing. A slave with destroyed feet was less likely to run, less likely to fight, and far more likely to submit. But it wasn't only practical, it was symbolic. In Greek society, the ability to stand upright, to walk unassisted, was tied to dignity. By taking that away, the masters sent a message. You will crawl before you will ever walk free. This punishment didn't end when the blows stopped. For many, it meant a lifetime of limping, pain with every step, and a constant reminder that even the ground beneath them could be taken away. If you were a slave in ancient Greece and your master wanted to make an example of you, the whip was the tool of choice. But this wasn't the quick lash of a leather strap. This was a calculated storm of pain designed to leave scars that spoke for a lifetime. The whip could be made from rawhide, often soaked in brine to stiffen it and make every strike tear more flesh. Sometimes small pieces of bone or metal were tied into the strands, turning each lash into a weapon that cut as it struck. The punishment wasn't counted in minutes, but in blows. 10 lashes might cripple. 50 could peel away skin. 100 could end a life. The slave would be stripped to the waist, tied to a post, or laid face down on the ground. There was no escape, no shifting to soften the blows. The first strike stung like fire, but by the 20th, the nerves began to overload and pain mixed with numbness. By the 50th, blood loss became a real threat. Crowds gathered for these punishments, not only to witness, but to learn. Every scream, every drop of blood was a warning to the others. And when it was over, survival was not guaranteed. Even those who lived were left with deep, roped scars across their backs, each one a permanent reminder of the day they became a living example of obedience through fear. In the Greek mind, the whip was not just punishment, it was theater, and the stage was the body of the slave. For some slaves in ancient Greece, pain wasn't the worst part of punishment. Permanence was. Branding was the mark of absolute ownership, an iron-hot symbol burned into flesh to remind you and everyone else exactly where you belonged. The process was deliberate and cruel. An iron rod shaped into a letter, symbol, or even a custom mark unique to the owner was heated until it glowed white. The slave was restrained, sometimes bound to a post, sometimes held down by others. As the iron drew closer, the heat could be felt long before it touched skin, a wave of agony in the making. And then, contact. The sound was as unforgettable as the pain. a sharp hiss as flesh seared, followed by the acrid smell of burning skin. Nerve endings exploded, but the pain didn't stop when the iron was removed. The burn throbbed for days, oozing and scabbing, often becoming infected. There was no medicine to soften the aftermath. In Greek society, this wasn't just a punishment. It was a public statement. A branded slave carried their shame wherever they went, the scar acting as a permanent collar. Some marks were hidden under clothing, but others were deliberately placed where they couldn't be concealed. On the face, the arms, the back of the neck. For the masters, it was efficient. A slave could try to run, but a brand meant that no one could mistake them for anything other than property. And for the slave, there was no erasing it. The pain faded, but the mark never did. Not all punishments in ancient Greece drew blood. Some trapped you inside your shame. Forced collaring was one of the most degrading. These were not light chains. They were iron rings or heavy wooden yokes, locked so tightly they could only be removed with tools. Some collars rose into tall wooden boards above the head, making it impossible to lie down or pass through doors. The edges scraped skin raw with every movement. Many carried engraved plates reading, "Runaway" or "Thief." Wherever the slave went, through markets or crowded streets, the collar announced their disgrace. The constant weight dragged the head forward, straining neck and shoulders. Eating and sleeping became painful. Some wore them for weeks, others until a harsher punishment came. It was more than restraint. It was a walking sentence. A daily reminder that freedom was not just lost, it was mocked. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. We know these are not easy stories to hear, and we deeply appreciate you joining us on this exploration of history's darker corners. If you found this video insightful, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with others who are interested in untold history, and subscribing to the channel to make sure you don't miss our next chapter. Thank you, and see you in the next episode of Dark Lore.